Well, good morning all.
Good morning.
It's great to be with you again. And, you know, thank you. And it's always good when the welcome is as warm as the invite. You know what I mean? You go to some churches and the invitation is really glamorous, right? You know, they are really looking forward to you coming for. And really, the church is praying. And when you get there, it's, you know, it's nothing like it. It's stone cold. It's, you know, thinking, did they know I was coming or what? You know? And when the invite and the welcome synchronize, it's great, isn't it? It's lovely. And that's always been my experience of ICF. The invite has been good.
Be as few words in it as possible.
And the welcome is always warm and vibrant, and it's great to be among you. So thank you for receiving me and welcoming me. And since I was with you last, I celebrated a birthday with a 0 on the end. I let you judge what the first letter is, or the first number rather. But yeah. I won't put that out, I won't canvass opinion on that, by the way. And I celebrated big 6-0 this year. Yeah, I know what you're thinking, right? I know what you're thinking, you know. Oh, never, Paul. You're like 70, you know. But it's great, it's been a great year, really enjoyed it. My wife turned 60 as well. And so we've had a lovely, eventful year, we've done a lot. And it's really been enjoyable. My eldest son turned 30. My brother-in-law turned 50. Wow. My mum and dad have been married 65 years. Wow. And so it's been a great year. It's been a year of celebrations in many ways. And I don't want it to come to an end, you know. I don't want the 31st of December to come, because, you know, 2018 has been a cracking year and what have you. But, and I know some of you as well have had birthdays with a 0 on the end. And yeah. So it's been a good year for you, but thank you for, as I say, your welcome and your prayers. I bring the greetings of the National Leadership Team. We've had council this week, Church Council, annual Church Council, so we've had a good time together in God's presence. And when Tim Jack knew I was coming to Inverness, he obviously wants to convey his best wishes and his love to you all, so please receive that. And yeah, so it's really good to be together, and we'll be looking this morning at the topic of growing pains. And yeah, we'll come to that in a moment. A Christian lady suddenly died and went to heaven. It's got nothing to do with growing pains, by the way. Right? A Christian lady died and went to heaven, and she was met by Peter at the gate, and Peter said, "What's your name?" And she gave her name, and he checked the roll call, and sure enough her name was on the list, and he asked her a few things about herself, and she said, "Well, I was happily married for 30 years, and you know, we had a lovely life, my husband and I had a lovely life together, and we served the Lord faithfully." And she said, "You know, I'm sorry that I've had to leave him behind, but, you know, this is a far better place," and blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure, you know, looking forward to that reunion one day and all the rest of it. And Peter said, "That's great." You know. He says, "Just one other test that you have to pass before getting into heaven." He said, "You have to spell a word." And she thought, "Oh, right, okay." And she said, "Oh, it's not a difficult word." No, he said, it's an easy word, it's the word love. So she said, "Oh, L-O-V-E. He said, "Oh, right, you're in, no problem." And she was enjoying life in heaven and thinking about her husband on earth, but thinking about the reunion and all the rest of it. And after a year, one day, Peter comes up to her and says, "I wonder, could you do me a favour? I wonder, could you look after the gate? You know, one day, I'm on a bit of business, so could you just look after the gate?" And so she takes her turn to look after, goes on duty and does a bit of duty on the gate. And during her time as the gatekeeper, who arrives in heaven but her husband? And she said, "Oh, it's lovely to see you, darling. I've really, really missed you, you know." But she said, it's only been a 12 months. It's really, you know, I never thought you'd come this soon." He said, "Well, you know, said, I had an accident and here I am. And she said, oh, it's lovely to see you. Let me just check. She said, I've got to check. Got to do the protocol that your name's on the list. Your name's on the list. She said, so tell me about the last year. And he said, well, he said, not long after you died, I did meet somebody else. Suddenly, a face changes. You met somebody else? He said, yeah, and she was very, very wealthy. She was very rich. And he said, so do you know that little house that we shared for like 25 years? Well, he said, I sold that. And I moved into her mansion. Oh, right. He said, and then she had so much money that I gave up work as well. Because she said, that's all we wanted to do was travel the world. And he said, so, you know, I've been to all kinds. The last 12 months, I've been to the most exotic places in the world. He said, you wouldn't believe it. She's there now, by now she's fizzing, right? I know you're perfect in heaven, but she's fizzing, right? She is fizzing. So he said, so, you know, he said, the reason I'm here, he said, I went scuba diving in the West Indies. And he said, I had an accident. And so he said, you know, this is why I'm here. And she's looking at him and thinking, She said, there is a test for you to get into heaven. He said, oh yeah, what's that? Well, you have to spell a word. And he said, oh yeah, no problem. He said, what's the word? She said, Czechoslovakia. Payback time, eh? Hey, well, it's really good to be together. And as I say, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to... sorry, I missed that.
We're all saying trying to work out how to spell.
Oh, yeah. So we're looking at growing pains, and you know, thinking on the journey up yesterday on the train that growing pains applies to an individual Christian. It applies to a church. It applies to a movement. I mean, in our movement, apostolic at the moment in the UK, is undergoing change and transition, and we are moving slowly along, not as quickly as I would like, but we are moving along on a certain journey, and there are growing pains. So there are reactions to certain things, and sometimes the pain is worth the gain, isn't it? Eh? When you I've got that right. Pain worth the gain. Yes. No pain, no gain. That's right. Yes. Yes. You come and pull your chair up here. So there are times when a movement actually experiences pain in order to get to the next level. Individual Christians, you feel, you know, they're perhaps new Christians and they're struggling with leaving stuff behind and renouncing stuff and moving on, and there's issues, but how good it is to see them come through that and overcome certain things in their life and move to the next level. But also it applies to the church, of course. When God begins to move, he begins to shake things. God shakes and he shapes. And we don't mind the shaping, but we're not too thrilled about the shaking, are we? And God begins to shake things that we've held onto, that, you know, have been sacred cows to us, if you like, have been things that, oh, you know, we can't possibly have church without doing that, or without that institution, without that aspect of church, it wouldn't feel right. And sometimes God shakes things in order to shape things. And so, you know, growing pains is a real issue for Christian life, the church, life of the church, and the life of the movement. And I mean, any church that desires to grow, any church that wants to grow without going through growing pains, I guess, is like a woman who says, I want to have a baby, but I don't want to go through labour. You know, I mean, you can't, can you? Eh? In order to produce, then there has to be pain. And so growing pains, and us men know nothing about that. We know nothing about that, ladies. So, you know, my sympathy is with you, but there we are. And when you're going through a time of growth, and an aspect of what God is doing. You know, you learn a lot. Leaders learn a lot about themselves, and leaders learn a lot about the people that they're looking after. And because you can have church as it is, just running normally and everything else, and then you discover things about yourself. There's a challenge to your own leadership. There's a challenge to your own preconceived ideas, to your own concepts. They are challenged. And then you take questions from the people, and you take the people express how they feel about the change. And so you learn a lot. It's a learning exercise. You know, they say you learn a lot in adversity. I think you learn a lot in growth as well. And you know, people say, well, you know, adversity, you just got to persevere. Good Bible word. You've got to persevere, and you've got to stick in there, and you'll come out of it as refined gold, and that's great. But you know what? You learn a lot about growth as well. When you go through growth spurts and seasons of growth, the church looks back and says, I wish I had done things different. You know, we did this well, but we could have improved in this area. So you learn a lot about yourself, because growth brings new people, and new people bring new challenges. And we're up for that, aren't we? Well, Robbie is anyway. Yeah, we're up for that. And you know, you're familiar with the term growing pains, of course. You've had them yourself, by the way. In the natural, haven't you? Eh? And it's interesting that the doctor doesn't call them. We've got a doctor in one of our churches, and I asked him a few weeks ago about growing pains. And he referred to it as RNLP. And I thought, what on earth? I thought he was talking about a lifeboat or something. You know? RNLP. And he said, because growing pains mostly happen during the evening or the night. So they're nocturnal. So he called them recurrent nocturnal limb pain. I think I'd rather stick to growing pains, wouldn't you, eh? So I'm here this morning to talk to you about recurrent nocturnal limb pains. The spiritual dimension of it. Eh? And yeah, but you know, I mean, it's in children who are aged between 3 and 14, they reckon, not that growing pains happen between that age limit. And then the next time Grandma sees them, she says, "Whoa, haven't you grown, eh? Wow, haven't you shot up?" And you think, yeah, you should, you know, the pain I've been through to look like this, the pain I've been through to get to this, you know. And isn't it great when people visit the church and they see the church grown and different, and you think, yeah, it's great, and the pain has been worth it. It's been worth it to get where we are. And so every church goes through various seasons of, sometimes there are dry seasons, there are stretching seasons, there are testing seasons, there are seasons of growth. I mean, God created the seasons, didn't he? You know, the 4 natural seasons that we know as autumn, winter, spring and summer, God created them. Go back to Genesis 1 and 2 and you'll read it. So God created the natural seasons, and God has ordained that there are seasonal cycles in the life of a Christian, but also in the life of the local church. And so just as there are seasons in the natural, so there are seasons in the spiritual. There is a purpose to those seasons. In a few weeks' time, we'll be celebrating Christmas. And one of the straplines we bring out at Christmas is that Jesus is the reason for the season. And we have Christmas cards with that on, and we have banners in the church that Jesus is the reason for the season. So there is a reason, there is a purpose behind every season. Ecclesiastes tells us that there is a time for everything. And whilst we are able to see the natural seasons, we're able to look and see that this morning, you know, there's a lot of mist down, there's, you know, blah, 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 it's kind of autumny, wintry feel to it, and we can identify that. We're not so discerning about the spiritual seasons that we're in. Because in the natural, you know, you have to dress differently according to the seasons, don't you? You know, so you have certain clothes for certain seasons of the year. When my eldest son was in university, he was in Newcastle University, he shared a house with a lad from the Channel Islands. Jonathan, a lovely lad. And I met him in September at Freshers Week when we went to get the son sorted out. We met him at Freshers Week, and the weather was really nice, you know. It wasn't boiling hot, but it was mid-September in Newcastle. It was reasonable weather, and he was dressed in t-shirts, shorts and flip-flops. And I found no reason to look at him in any strange way. He was fine. That was the way. That's what he wore. It was nice weather, and when I saw him at Christmas, he was in t-shirts, shorts and flip-flops. And when I saw him in February, when it was icy cold, he was in t-shirts, shorts and flip-flops. And they tell me that he went to lectures like that, and one day the lecturer felt so sorry for him that she offered to go and buy him a coat. Now, he came from the Channel Islands, so his mum and dad weren't short of a bob or two, you know what I mean? But that's the way he dressed. He had one attire and he wore it right through the whole cycle, right? And but you know, we can spiritualize that. And we can think churches just, they're not flexible, they're not adaptable, they will just, this is how we do it. This is how we do church all the time. Come what may. Whatever the Holy Spirit says. However the Holy Spirit is moving, however, whenever different people come in or what have you, this is the way we are going to do it. We have to be flexible. We have to learn to discern. We have to be adaptable. Jesus, remember, confronted the Pharisees in the New Testament. And the Pharisees, of course, were the religious leaders of the day. You know, the people who gave Jesus the most trouble were religious people. That's ironic, isn't it? Jesus had more trouble with religious leaders than he did with anyone else. And because they were blind to what God was doing. They knew the Old Testament scriptures. They understood the Old Testament scriptures, which actually pointed to the coming of Jesus. But they failed to discern that the Son of God was among them. They failed to discern who Jesus was. I remember Jesus said to them, you're able to forecast the weather patterns because you look at the sky and it's red or what have you, and you're able to read those signs, you're able to discern that. But you're spiritually blind in discerning what season you are in, what spiritual season you are currently in. And we all know what a season is. But we're not sure. I get the impression a lot of church leaders are not certain as to what season it is for them. One of my roles within the leadership team is to go and sit with churches and talk about mission and talk about, you know, cultivating a missional imagination and all the rest of it. And you have to start with, well, where are you? You know, where are you currently? Where are you on the curve? What is God saying to you at the moment? And an awful lot of leaders, they're not sure. You know, they waffle about that. They can't be precise about this is where we are in God. This is what we need to do. These are the clothes spiritually that we need to wear for this particular season. And Jesus said to the Pharisees, you know, you're blind in discerning the season that you're in. In the book of Chronicles, in the Old Testament, all the tribes of Israel are mentioned, but one tribe is commended. One tribe is actually highlighted, and it's the sons of Issachar. And it says that they were commended because they understood the times and the seasons in which they were in. They were a relatively small group in comparison to the other tribes. They were numerically greater. But the sons of Issachar were a relatively small group, about 200 in number, yet they had understanding of the times and the seasons in which they lived. And, you know, even as a small, relatively small church, in the big scheme of things, we can still have an understanding of the times and the seasons in which we live. So our praying is different. Our preaching is tapered in a certain way. Our philosophy of church, our understanding of lost people and the harvest field and all those things, you know, we look at differently when we have an understanding of the seasons and the times in which we live. So there are seasons for a church. Seasons of preparation, seasons of transition, dry seasons. Ever been through a dry season? Hey, we have. Eh? Seasons of stretching when you think, God, what are you doing with me? You know, you're dear me, God. And you come out of it and you're a bigger person in Jesus because of it. You know, just like when Grandma sees it, haven't you grown since last Christmas? You know, haven't you shot up since last year? Yeah. You know, and we want people to come and say, oh, this church is different to what I saw last year. Hey, this church has been stretched in so many ways in its praying, in its intercession, in its hospitality, in its generosity, in its missional aspect. This church has been stretched. So there are seasons of stretching. There are seasons of silence. God, why don't you speak to us? God, are you there? Why don't you speak to us? Why don't you show us something, God? Why don't you just... Seasons of silence. Those are hard seasons. When you're battling through saying, God, is there a word? We need a word. Is there... Lord, are you going to come through with something for us? Seasons of refreshing and renewal. Those are lovely, aren't they? When God comes to refresh us. When church is refreshing. Church is just like, oh, hallelujah, spiritual shower every week. We're just loving it, aren't we? Then there are seasons of spiritual battles. You know, whenever I've pastored the church, there's always been a time when certain people in that church have been targeted. And it seems they all come at the same time. You know, so there's family illness, or there's relationship breakdown, or there's, you know, difficulties in work and redundancies and family feuds and all the rest. And they're all happening at the same time. And the church is taking the brunt of it. And you think we're going through a season of spiritual battles here. And we've got to stand together and we've got to pray this through. But it's a real thing. But then there's the growth season. Hallelujah. We love them, don't we? You know, and... few churches that I've been through, we've been through a pastor, as you know, in Clyde Valley, in Glasgow, for 9 years, and I was in the Greenock Church, and the Greenock Church, we went through a lovely growth phase. It was steady growth, so it was manageable, and it was during the time where we had what we called the Toronto Blessing. You remember that time, that move of God globally? And you earned your corn as a leader then, because you had to sift out what was of the flesh. You had to sift out what was, you know, man-made, if you like, and accept what God was doing. And there were lots of issues. There were lots of awkward conversations that I had to have with people. But the end result was we saw the church grow. But it was manageable growth. Now, when I went to Middlesbrough, and after I'd been there about 2 years, we went through like 3 years where it was growth like I've never seen before. And we didn't manage it well. I'll talk about that in a moment. We didn't manage it well. You know, we enjoyed the ride. We enjoyed the ride. It was fantastic. Couldn't wait for Sunday. Doesn't matter what you do Monday to Saturday, because God will show up Sunday and it'll be fine. You know? And we weren't ready for it, because we were a church that was comfortable in its own skin, you know. And what God was giving to us was just, we weren't ready for it. And as I'll tell you in a moment or two, we missed out big time on really what God was doing. We'd have a different church there today if we had managed that growth season well. Because, you know, remember Jesus said about wineskins, he said, you know, I'm pouring out new wine is coming, but the old wineskin needs to be changed. The old wineskin, don't try patching it up. You need a new wineskin to accommodate the new wine of the kingdom, the new wine of what God is wanting to do. And you know, many churches have wanted new wine. We've prayed for new wine, but we failed to prepare a new wineskin. And you know, it's possible to miss the visitation of the Spirit. It's possible to miss it. God is wanting to do it, but the wineskin just will not take it. It'll break. and we will lose what God has given to us. And because whilst the message of the gospel is timeless, our methodology needs to change. Our methodology needs to be adaptable and flexible. And the packaging that we wrap the gospel in must adapt with the times and the seasons in which we live. And or we will quickly lose what we once had, or lose relevance. Those of us that have had kids know that, you know, every time a term starts, we have to go to Clark's or wherever to buy new shoes for them. Eh? Oh, your feet are growing, me. Can't you slow down? Those feet are growing like, you know, anything. But you know what? You can't send a child back to school with the shoes that they've worn for the last 2 years. Not just because they may be scuffed or they may be, you know, not in very good condition. But think of the child's foot. It's grown, eh? And you're putting old shoes on this growing foot, eh? How painful would that be? So you have to go out and buy new shoes. And you've got to get new shoes to just accommodate the growth factor in the child. And in the church, sometimes we just try to hold it all in, what God is doing. You know, this is the way we've always done it. This is the way we operate. This is our culture, you know. But I learned a long time ago that culture is not set in stone. Culture is movable. You can shift culture. And you need to shift culture from time to time in order to accommodate what God is doing. And that was my experience in the Middlesbrough church. I went to Middlesbrough in 1998, having been 9 years in Clyde Valley, and it was a big challenge. It was a church on a housing estate, which in terms of social deprivation was the 3rd worst in England. Yes, there was one in Liverpool and one in Manchester that were 1 and 2, and we were number 3. So it was the devil's backyard, you know. And it had barbed wire all around the church. It was like a jail, not a church, you know. It had barbed wire all around it, and they employed a security guard on a Sunday to sit in the car park because the cars would be targeted, and it was all that. And you know, saying, thank you, Jesus. You know, thank you for sending me. You know what I mean? Blah, blah, blah. And it was really, you know. And then we started to get into things, and we started to put down some building blocks. And then 2001, we began to see a move of God. And it was peculiar in the sense that the Sunday morning meeting was just average. We had about 60 people, and that was okay. It was, you know, it was a nice Pentecostal type, charismatic type meeting on a Sunday morning. But Sunday night, the finger of God came. The breath of God came. And, you know, over 3 years, we saw in excess of 170 people make first-time decisions. Incredible. And I'm talking all stratas of society. I'm talking about prostitutes, pimps, drug addicts, people from middle-class backgrounds. I'm talking about the whole spectrum of people. And so Sunday nights, people coming from other churches just to be part of it. It's great. It's a real move of God, real season of growth. But we weren't ready for it. And Paul wasn't ready for it. I was enjoying it. Oh, fantastic. I couldn't wait to get there. And praying for people at the end, and then saying to people, how foolish is this? Saying to people who had come from those kind of dark worlds, lovely to see you. See you next Sunday. Sending people back, newly born, fresh faith, as fragile as that is, sending them back into their dark culture, their dark world, and expecting them to turn up for church next Sunday. You know, they weren't in my world. I lived in a different world to them. And I learned bitter lessons. And of the 175 people that were made first-time commitments, we kept about 5%. We kept less than 10 people. Some of them are still in the church today, some have moved away. But we kept less than about 5% we kept. when you think, if we had been ready, if the wineskin had been ready, if the church had been ready, what we would have retained, what the church would have been like today. But even then, this is the point I'm coming to this morning, even then, when God is moving, God's doing stuff, there were a certain cohort of people within the church who complained that the doors were slamming and there were sweet papers on the floor at the end of the meeting. One lady hid the vacuum cleaner from me on one Sunday because she wanted to make a point. So she hid, I would be in the church till 10 o'clock sometimes on a Sunday night because they'd have a cafe after it and all kinds of conversations and prayer ministry, deliverance ministry, all that was going on. And very often it would just be 3 or 4 of us in the church, and I'd get the hoover out sometimes and just, and there were chewing gum papers and all that. Hey, who cares, And when, I remember one week she actually hid the vacuum cleaner from me. And I had to go and ask her, and she had gone and nobody could find the vacuum cleaner. And she wanted to make a point, this is God's house. We don't have chewing gum on the floor here and all the rest of it. And then I remember, we had people come in who were basically on the streets, right? And maybe hadn't had a shower for a few weeks. Literally. Right? And so this lady, bless her, she would go into her handbag, she would pull out Chanel No. 5.
Oh, no.
And she would go round like this, spraying at the back of the church. Spraying, because of the aroma. Oh. Right. I used to have said, it says Jesus once he was righteously angry. And I had that. I was righteously angry with certain people in my church. Because God is moving, God's doing stuff, and that's all they're interested in is going around with Chanel No. 5. You know what I mean? Right? And hiding the vacuum cleaner, not for me to find it, but just to make a point. See, with growth comes opposition, resistance. And that was my experience that, we're thinking, well, this is great, God's doing amazing things. I mean, we had prostitutes get saved, right? And we sent them to Teen Challenge. We sent them away to a rehab centre. We sent them to West Wales. We sent them to Yorkshire, to detox centres. And, I mean, is there anything better in life than seeing those type of transformational stories? I don't think there is, right? Who cares about some sweet papers on the floor, eh? In comparison to people being born again and renewed and transformed in Jesus to live a new life. People are more interested in the small little minor things. And so we had issues because the culture of the church was changing, you see. It was transient. It was changing. And the culture that was once upon a time there, that we are, a stereotypical apostolic church, whatever that means. But it's moving now. The culture is changing. The culture is moving. I was saying to Robbie at breakfast this morning, I was brought up in the apostolic church, brought up in a very traditional apostolic church in South Wales. Chris will bear witness to that. And a lot of people had the idea that in order to belong to this church, you need to believe what we believe. If you don't believe what we believe, you don't belong here. And they made that clear to people. So if you don't believe what we believe, then you don't belong. But of course, it's changed now in many ways. And when I came out of Wales, and when I came to Scotland, and when I've been in England and read certain stuff, I now believe that you belong, you believe, and you behave. Right? You belong first. So I've allowed people to belong to the church. I've allowed people to come and say, this is my church. They're on a journey. They might not have put their hand up for Jesus yet and said yes, but they are belonging to the church. And so there are times that I've had people, I've had the police in Middlesbrough ring me up in the early hours of the morning and say, do you know so-and-so? And I'll say, no. Well, they know you. Really? You know, and they could have questionable professions as well. And you don't know them, but they know you. Really? Yeah, they say they're part of your church. And I think, oh, the name doesn't ring a bell. I said, I'll need to come over. So, you know, you get out of bed sometimes and drive over to the police station. And then you say, oh, and they'll say, oh, Pastor Paul. You know, they're half cut, you know what I mean? Completely. Pastor Paul, thanks for coming, you know. This is my pastor, you know. Well, yeah, okay, yeah. But you know what, on reflection, they felt they belonged to a community of grace. They felt they belonged. I wouldn't like to say, you don't belong here. You don't believe what I believe. You don't believe in the deity of Jesus. You know. You don't believe in eschatology like I believe in it, you know. What? Hey, come on in. See, the culture was changing, but people didn't move with the culture. And so people that, you know, a certain lady who hid the vacuum cleaner, and a certain lady who got Chanel No. 5 out of a bag every now and again, they couldn't see the wood for the trees. Right? The culture's moving. And we need to be adaptable and move with it. You see, you know, I often used to say to the church, you know, I tried to be as light as I could with it. And I said, you know, I've got some good news and bad news for you. I said, what do you want first? And they say, oh, the good news, you know. So, well, the good news is that this church is growing with new people. And they say, what's the bad news? And I say, this church is growing with new people. And it depends, I said, on your perspective. It depends how you view it. I said, I know what I am. I'm in the first category. It's good news. Hallelujah. It's what I was born for. To see people come into the kingdom of God. To see people saved. To see people restored. To see people filled with God's love and God's Spirit. That's what I was born for. Hallelujah. Well, then you look at the faces of some people and you think, oh, this is just foreign to them. I mean, they can pray on a Wednesday in the prayer meeting for lost people and react like they do on a Sunday. You know, I mean, you know, there are Pharisees in 2018, aren't there? There are Pharisees today. And it's just mind-boggling just to see it. Because when the church is growing, culture will change. Culture will move. It's transient. And we have to accept that. And, you know, there are different demands on people, demands on leaders, demands on different people. The pastor will have to say, you know, can you free some time up this week to meet with so-and-so? We have to reevaluate our preaching. We used to have a preaching pool in the church when we first started, you know, it was everybody has a turn. That's nonsense. If you listen to some of these preach, you wouldn't give them a turn. Right? You know, that was the philosophy. Everybody has a turn. Everybody comes to me saying, Paul, you haven't put me on the preaching plan for a few months. No, I haven't. You know, because I'm decreasing the pool. I'm decreasing the pool. And we went from a preaching plan of about 11 to 3. And one of them was a woman. Praise God. And the 3 of us did the preaching. Because I said to the other 8, they were awkward conversations. They were growing pains, weren't they? They were awkward conversations. You're more suited in a one-to-one. You're more suited in a small group. You know, preaching publicly is not your thing. And I would listen to them first. I wouldn't just go on hearsay, you know. I mean, I could have just, I trust my wife's judgment, so I could have gone on her judgment, because I'd be in other churches on a Sunday morning. I'd never miss the Sunday night, because that's what God was doing. But I'd be in other churches on a Sunday morning most of the time. And I'd say to her, how did it go? And she'd say, yeah, it was okay. You know, what was, she said, oh, it was all right. He did his best. I mean, she's fair. She's far more gracious than me, you know. She'd say, he did his best, love him, you know, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, right, I know that's coded words for it wasn't very good. Right? And, you know, the church didn't benefit from it. And so I addressed that. And, but, you know, that produces reactions in people then, when you take that from them, because they think, well, this is what I've done all my life, you know, this is, not all my life, but this is what I've done a lot of the time. And so, you know, and then it wasn't just the quality of the preaching. Sometimes I used to say to people, you used about 15 words tonight, that if I walked into those doors for the first time, I would not have had a clue what they meant. Jargon, in other words. In-house language. You know, just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it, eh? Without thinking. And we've all done it. I may have done it in the last half an hour now, you know. We just roll off your tongue, you know. But we have to evaluate the language that we are using to connect with people. Because I had a congregation there that, if you know, dear me, I mean, you had to go back to basics. And you had to evaluate everything you were saying. Because, you know, and even using in-house terminology, you know, just bypassing them, and people would just, some of these men would just use that. And anyway, it was, you know, it was a season of growth, but it was a season of change as well, right? And it was a season of pain for some of them, because while they were celebrating the growth thing, they'd think, well, where do I fit in? You know, I've always fitted in. I've always been on the rota. I've always done it, you know, this way and what have you. But, you know, the other thing that I felt when we were in that growth spurt is that, yes, the Sunday night was growing, and it was great. But I felt God say to me, you know, the whole thing, the governance, the structure needs to grow as well. You need to rise all at the same time. So the kids work and the youth work and the hospitality and the welcome and the prayer. And so I began to challenge people in those particular roles for them to rise again, for them to see things differently, for them to have a new perspective. Not just one aspect, because, you know, you're out of balance. If you just got one meeting that's growing and the others aren't growing, you're out of balance, you're out of kilter, aren't you? So, you know, we attended to we put some resources into the children's ministry for that to grow, and the youth work, and the prayer meeting took on a different complexion. And I put different people, I didn't change everybody, but I put new people on the door as well, when it comes to welcoming. Why do we put miserable people on the door? Hey, why do we want people who just can't crack a smile on the door? You know? I mean, you say to them, tell your face you're saved. You know? Tell your face, I'm a Christian, I know who I am. Yeah, you know, well, you know, tell your face that, you know. Why do we put miserable people who can't even be bothered to, you know? We want to put friendly people, don't we? People that can, you know, connect and have got a bit of charisma about them. But those type of people began to change. But the point I'm making is that the whole thing needed to lift. Not just one aspect, but, you know, the admin and the prayer and the youth, that they would all rise together. Because, I mean, it doesn't apply here, I don't suppose, but in some of the churches I know,
You're very kind.
yes, they are still operating a governance structure today that was fit for purpose in 1950. So they are still operating a structure, right, that in its era was fine, but their era was 40, 50, 60 years ago, when the church was very small and it was just built around one or two families, and they still operate that governance structure today. We have to look at that and change that, and that can bring conflict on times, because, you know, wrong governance can hinder the mission of the church. Wrong structures, you know, rigid structures can hinder mission and the profile of the church. So there's culture, right, that needs to change, because that can produce growing pain. But there's, you know, we'll keep on going with the same letter. We'll have alliteration this morning. The next word would be care, the care ministry of the church. Because when a church grows, the pastor can't always shake your hand at the end of the meeting and talk to you like he has for the last 10 years. You get what I'm saying, don't you? You know. So we went to this situation where, you know, I was there on a Sunday night when I first went there, and we had about 30 people come in. We'd have about 60 in the morning, we'd have 30 at night, and I'd have conversations with them in the cafe. I'd go round the table, you know, I knew everything about them, you know, I knew their chip and pin number and all, you know, I knew everything about them, right? And you know, knew them inside out, you know, and then they, oh, Pastor Paul, you know, blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, the thing changes. New people are coming. So I'm on tables talking to people, because that's what you do. So you talk to people, and you engage with them, and you think, well, I can, you know, don't worry about them because they are fine. But they weren't fine. Because they would quibble and say, Pastor doesn't talk to me anymore. Which is nonsense, right? You know, the pastor doesn't care for me, you know. The pastor doesn't, he doesn't ask about my Johnny anymore. He doesn't ask about Uncle Bill anymore, or what have you. And you think, no, I just haven't got the time, you know what I mean? I'm really consumed with, you know, and that's growing pains. So culture and care, you know, the care aspect of the church is really important. But the pastor can't micromanage everybody. So that's where others come in, you know. I remember somebody come into my church to preach, and they were from New Zealand, and you know, we were going through this phase, and he arrived at my house about 5 o'clock on the Sunday, right? About 4:30, I beg your pardon. He travelled from London. He arrived at my house about 4:30. I fed him, you know, we gave him tea, and I told him our journey. In the car going to Middlesbrough, 20 minutes in the car, I told him our journey and what have you, right? And I didn't, it was all positive, right? I didn't say, but you know, there are aspects. There's a lady who pulls Chanel number 5 into my bag and all this, right? And a lady who hides the vacuum cleaner and all this. I didn't tell him any of that, right? Honest. And so it's all positive, right? And he got on his feet to preach. And he said, it's great to be here, blah, blah, blah. Word of the Lord is, extend extra grace to this man. I hadn't told him anything. I said, it's great. Terry, it's fantastic. I said, you know, I'm really enjoying it. I said, I know we've got to put nurture and everything else into place. I know all that, but I said, you know, if I'm dreaming, don't wake me up. This is great, right? And he said to the church, he said, extend extra grace to this man. And I was sat similar to where Robbie is, and he told me to stand, right? And he got people around me to pray, and he honoured me in front of the people, he affirmed me, blah, blah, blah. And he said, you know, in a time of growth, he said, we have to dig deep for extra grace for our leaders. Because he said, they're in the front line, it's very demanding. And then he turned to the leaders and said, you're not getting away with it, you need to extend grace to the people as well. So he said, it's reciprocal. There's grace from them to you, and there's grace from you to them. And that changed something. I mean, some people were still the same, you know. She still pulled Chanel number 5 out to right? But, you know, most people were understanding, okay, I get it. It took a man to come thousands of miles from the other side of the world. I mean, I could have got up and said, now listen, people, you know, you need to afford me a bit more grace. They would have put their tongue out at me and said, you're joking, aren't you? Hey, familiarity breeds contempt. It does. Let's be honest. When you're familiar with somebody, you think, you know, God sent a man. Hallelujah. The man sent from God whose name was Terry. Thousands of miles away. And he came and said, afford this man extra grace. Give him additional grace. He said, God told me, even before I had a conversation with Paul, he was in my house for about 40 minutes. Right? And it was all positives. The journey in the car was all positives. I wouldn't grumble and say, oh, Terry, you know, people are just, you know, that cohort of people that are just digging in and, you know, they feel... So the care aspect is very important as well. You know, I think it's Max Lucado who talks about, no, it's not Max Lucado, I forget who it is, that's another author. He talks about the 99 syndrome. You know, the 99 sheep are in the pen, and the good shepherd was looking after the one. And he said, you know, but if the sheep could talk, I wonder would they bleat and say, what about us? What about us? You know, we haven't gone astray. We haven't gone walkies. you know, we are where we should be. What about us? And he said there are some people in the church who are in the 99 syndrome. They'll never give you any problems per se, but their attitude is not what it should be. But they're in the pen. They're in the fold. But their attitude is, as long as you treat me right, I'm okay. And there was people saying, you know, never talks, I don't consider him accessible anymore. You know, well, I'm here Monday to Saturday as well. You can phone me, you can meet me, what have you. But on that Sunday, I was giving all my energy to try and to make these connections, because I realised that those were meaningful conversations. And that was just a pain that you know, we grew up. We had to endure. And see, that church as well was used to, I mean, whilst it was apostolic, so it was theocratic in its governance, there was an element of democracy about that church, where people were brought in on decisions, even before they were made. So sometimes people would be asked their views about things. Well, I didn't operate that way, you know. I mean, you've got to take people with you, I accept that. But I would have private conversations with people. I wouldn't call a church meeting and say, can I have a show of hands, what do you think we do? Right? That's not apostolic. That's not the way we do things around here. Right? But I would, in the lead-up to making a decision, I would have private buy-in. So I would meet with people and say, look, particularly, you know, John Maxwell talks about, look for those who are influencers. And you'll know the influencers in your church. You'll know the movers and shakers, right? You'll know people that if I can get this person on board, then they have a little network that they can influence. And it's not being, you know, sneaky or manipulative in any way. It's actually saying, look, you know, I want to try and persuade you about this aspect of the vision, the next step for this church. You know, will you run with me? Will you work with me? Will you try and, you know, convince people that this is of God and we're in it together? And there was kind of in this, you know, that this church was more, we'll have a show of hands about stuff, and on something, not everything, but on something. And so people wanted to retain that. You couldn't do that when the church was growing. Because while I say we lost people, you know, we only retained 5%, as I said, right? But we didn't, you know, people just didn't come one week and not come back the next week. People came for weeks. Some people came on a Sunday morning, right? And from a Sunday night. But eventually they just fell away because the church wasn't ready for it. The church, you know, we never, you know, I tried to set up some discipleship, but it was a bit of a failure, if I'm honest. And so while the Sunday morning meeting grew in attendance because of the Sunday night, so we had to do things different. You know, the people coming to the prayer meeting, I had people come in on the prayer meeting who probably never prayed in their life. You know, they were coming to the prayer meeting and I'm thinking, right, we've got to restructure the prayer meeting. We've got to do things a bit different. And it was a big challenge. But the point I'm making is that people felt that they weren't cared for anymore. That's a growing pain. And that's one that we have to look at that, but we have to delegate, I guess. That has to be put out to it. That's where others need to come alongside somebody to help in the care ministry. The other aspect was the control issue. Some people thought we've had an element of control in this church. You know, family dynasties are great, but they can be dangerous. And that's not present company excluded. But, family dynasties are great, and you know, I've got a family dynasty. You know, my uncle was national leader, my brother's a pastor, my father's a pastor, was a pastor. You know, my cousins have been in the church, and we've got a family dynasty, and it's great. No, right? But there are some family dynasties I've come across that have been very controlling. This is our church. This is my church. This is my uncle's church. I remember going to a church in South Wales and just moving there as an elder, and I was about 21, 22 years of age, and I wanted to set up a Monday evening kids club, you know, where we had basketball and we had football and we had games, and I thought, great. So I went to the elders meeting, told the elders were all in agreement. One of the elders went home and told his wife, which was okay, and then next Sunday his wife challenged me and said, you can't run she's telling me you can't do it. You can't run a kids club in the main hall. And why is that? I said, you know, just respectful. She was a lot older than me. I said, why is that? And she said, because my mother donated the carpet. Really? She said, my mother donated the carpet. And you can't use it, you can't run on it, you can't play games on it because she donated the carpet. So I spoke to the elder, who was her husband, and said to him, your wife has spoke to me about this. Ah, yeah. Oh, he's apologising for it. Oh, I'm sorry, but you know, blah, blah, blah. But you know, that was the level of thinking, you see, it was control. You know, I mean, some people, when the church grows, people say, the seat I always sit in, I can't sit in that anymore. I can't park my car in the same slot anymore. Because it's an element of control. That's what it is. People feel, well, you know, we're out of control here, and it's a real issue for some people. I don't feel as needed as I once did in this church. Well, you know, some people, you know, have got ownership of the past and they need to let go of it. I went to a seminar a number of years ago. It was entitled Getting Past Your Past. You know, and it applied to new Christians, but it applied to churches as well. How to get past your past. And some people are wedded to the past, aren't they? There's ownership. They idolize the past. You know, they have a high degree of ownership of the past, and they bring that into the present. And the moment you begin to change things, the moment you begin to move something on or you know, transform something, there's a reaction. As I said, the lady said, my mother donated this carpet for me, and you know, because history to her was a big thing. A man went to his pastor once and he said, my wife's historical. And the pastor said to him, surely you mean hysterical. And he said, no, she's always dragging up the past. And we have people who are historical, you know, they're not hysterical, they're historical, because they idolize the past. And they're wedded to the past, and it's ownership of the past. And you know, I remember when I was in Scotland, indeed, surprise, surprise, starting a children's ministry, and because we did it a different way, I was confronted by a couple who said, Uncle Fred started that. And it's Uncle Fred's children's ministry. Uncle Fred was nowhere to be seen by now, right? I think, you know, he'd gone to be the Lord, I think, right? But because it was Uncle Fred's children's ministry, then Pastor Paul couldn't change it. That's what you're up against sometimes. When you want to move on, there's a growing pain of just, you know, people go back to the past because, so, you know what do they say, how many Methodists does it take to change a light bulb? You know? And you say, well, what do you mean change a light bulb? My Auntie Joan donated that light bulb all those years ago. How dare you change that light bulb? So you've got culture, you've got care, you've got control, you've got comfort. Some people like to feel comfortable, don't they? You know the old slogan, churches, you know, what do? We comfort the disturbed, but we disturb the comfortable. That's what church should be. But for some people it's just, you know, I don't mind growth, I don't mind new people as long as it's not uncomfortable. As long as I remain comfortable, then, you know, historically, the church has thrived when it's been tested rather than when it's been comfortable. It takes unselfish people, you know, to build a church and make a church effective. Because you can't just be thinking about yourself all the time. You've got to think outside of yourself. That's new ground for some people, present company excluded. But that's new ground for some people, that they've got to think outside of themselves. And they've got to think, well, it's not about me, you know. It's about people, it's about reaching people. And so a comfortable church, you know, it just gravitates to itself all the time. It gravitates inwardly rather than outwardly all the time. It has no outward focus. It's my experience of a comfortable church is that we always gravitate in, you know, how will it impinge on us? How will it affect us? Will it mean extra dates in my diary? Will it mean more work for me? Will it mean that I'll be stretched and all the rest of it? And then, you know, the capacity challenge. You know, people, we're going to have a big surprise in heaven, I think, aren't we? You know, there are people, honestly now, even, you know, the lady who squirts the perfume and all the rest of it, right? You know, she had more capacity than she knew. And I could see it. And that's what frustrated me. I could see that she had more capacity to flow in God and be effective than she knew. And you know, I used to sit with her and try and say this, but it all was just, this is where I am. This is my plateau. This is where I am. And you know, it's getting people to see that, you know, get beyond with what you're comfortable with. Get beyond that. Allow the grace of God to empower you to do things that you've not done before. Move out of comfort zone. And, you know, in 30 years of ministry, I think I've made my fair share of mistakes with people that I've had to deal with who have been awkward and blocking vision and blocking. You know, I've made my fair, you know, I concede that. 30 years of ministry, I've come across some people and I probably regret some of the conversations I've had with them. But you know, I'm disappointed that I've actually had to have those conversations with some people. Because they've been really blockers and have stopped things and have been awkward. And, you know, I remember somebody telling me when I came into the ministry, they said, remember this, Paul, people with problems are not a problem. It's problem people are the problem. ICF doesn't have any problem people. Of course you don't. You know, you want to come with me and see what I've got, you know. But people with problems are not a problem. It's problem people are the problem. And of course, in it all, right, with culture, with care, with control, with comfort, the thing that we have to have at the forefront of our mind with all those things that need attention is that God calls us to unity. God calls us to unity. It's, you know, I often say that unity reminds me of my wife. It's precious, but it's costly. Yeah. I tell you, it's costly. She just celebrated her 60th. It's costly, I can tell you, right? It's precious, but it's costly. And unity is the thing that we must aim for and strive for. And when I think of unity, you know, it's such a fragile thing, but it's a precious thing. I mean, unity can be torpedoed quite easily, can't it? It can be torpedoed quite easily by a wrong word, a wrong action, some misbehaviour, you know, a bad attitude surfacing, jealousy, resentment, envy, you know, payback time. All those things can torpedo the unity that God is wanting. Because if we don't have unity, we can have all these other things, right? It's all of no avail. And so when we look for unity, when we look for, you know, what does unity look like? Then we have to go to heaven to look at it. What does unity look like? You see, if you're going to start a children's ministry or a youth ministry or a coffee morning or an evening for the homeless or an outreach, you, like me, very often would go to the church down the road and see how they do it. How did you start this ministry? You know, and you take soundings, wouldn't you, from how they started and the issues they had and the teething problems that they had, and you'd iron them out. And you know, I visited loads of churches and so I just want to observe how you do your church and your ministry. But when it comes to unity, we don't visit the church down the road. Because the only model for unity is in heaven. Father, Son, and Spirit. The greatest model, demonstration of unity you'll find anywhere is in heaven. The unity of the Godhead. Father, Son, and Spirit, all working together, all coming together, loving one another. The Father willingly giving up the Son coming and saying, I only do those things that please the Father. Father, I have finished the work that you gave me to do. Jesus goes back, he sends the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit comes. He doesn't speak of himself, he speaks of Jesus. The Holy Spirit is here to glorify Jesus. That's the type of unity that we want. There's no one-upmanship. There's no ulterior motives. There's no hidden agendas. We're all flowing on the same page. We're all working for the good of each other. We're all promoting one another. We're all honouring one another. That's the unity that we want. That's why it's a precious thing. But it's costly. It's fragile. But it's of the utmost importance. You know, Jesus prayed about the unity of the church the night before he died. John chapter 17 is the great high priestly prayer of Christ. It's found in no other gospel other than John's gospel. And his prayer was, Father, I pray that the unity, the oneness that we have enjoyed together, talking about pre-Bethlehem, the pre-existence of Jesus, he said, I want that unity. I want the church to experience, the believers to experience that oneness. He prayed for that. You know, if you knew you were going to die tomorrow, what would you pray tonight? Hey? What would you be praying about tonight? If you knew you were going to die tomorrow, sorry to be morbid, but you know what I mean. It's a serious question. You'd probably be praying for your family, wouldn't you? And, you know, you pray for your neighbours, or you pray for those people that you've tried to witness to in the workplace, and the people that you've just longed to see come to the gates of the kingdom. You pray one more time for them. Jesus prayed for us, that we might have oneness. He didn't pray for the prosperity of the church. He didn't pray for the success of the church. He prayed for the unity of the church. And I'll tell you why he prayed for the unity of the church and why he gave it such a high position is because John inserts another little phrase that Jesus said. I pray, says, that we might be one, that they may believe. So what's he saying? He's linking unity with mission. And he's saying if the church is one, it'll speak for itself. Hallelujah. If the church is of one heart and one mind and one purpose, it'll speak for itself. Unity is the highest form of evangelism, when you think of it. You know, I know churches, bless them, they're evangelizing, but what are they bringing to people on a Sunday? They're bringing people to a fragmented house on a Sunday. They're bringing people sometimes to a toxic culture on a Sunday. They're bringing people to somewhere where people can get hurt easily. And bless them, they're out on the streets, they're doing this, they're doing that. But there's no unity in the house. Unity and mission are integral. So that when we evangelize, the oneness of the church speaks. Hallelujah. That's why it's precious. David says, it's like the oil that flows down the beard of the high priest. It's like the dew that comes down from the mountain. He says how good and pleasant it is to dwell together in unity. You know, there are some things that are good for us but are not pleasant. My grandmother used to give me cough medicine years ago. She used to shake the bottle violently. and tried to convince me in 30 seconds that this is good for you. And it was horrible. Tasted like Castrol GTX oil. You know, used to shake the bottle and it used to come out thick. You know, a big spoon like that, you know what I mean? And it's good for you, son. It's good for you. It's horrible, but it's good for you. There are some things that are pleasant but are not good for you. But unity is good and pleasant. It's what we strive for. Paul says, endeavour to keep it. God, it's a God-given thing. Endeavour in all your growth, in all your contemporary ways of doing church. Remember this, remain as one. Remain united. Endeavour to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. You see, diversity and yet unity. I don't know many other organisations that can do that. But it's the work of the Spirit. In the church where I'm currently at, in Stockton-on-Tees, I'm just looking after that church. It's going through an impasse at the moment, so I'm going through that church and heading it up. It's a church of 30, 35 people at the moment. There are 12 different nationalities in that church. You know, just 35 people, but there are 12 different nationalities. And in the area, in the locality, there are probably a lot more than that. The church has never been more multicultural in the UK than it is today. The Highlands may be different, but you know, we're talking about inner cities. God calls us with all that diversity to long for unity, to aim for unity. You see, unity doesn't mean that we all look the same, we all dress the same, we all pray the same. We're not clones of each other. But unity is a heart thing. You know, I've often said to the people in the church where I am, you know, shaking my hand doesn't mean that we are united. People have shook my hand in the past, and metaphorically they could have stuck a knife in my back. God decides on unity, not me. I don't give the church marks out of 10 for unity. God is the assessor of unity. That's why it says, for there the Lord commands the blessing. And people that have shook my hand in the past, some people who have shook my hand in the past, their heart has been nowhere near mine. When they shook my hand, we think, it's okay. There's just a semblance of you. Oh, it's a heart thing. And my heart is right with your heart. And we're in it together. We have a heart connection, more than just a handshake. We have a heart connection. And when that's in place, when our heart is saying, yes, God, we're in this together, that's the unity that God looks for. You see, let's be honest. I mean, I've squandered loads of energy, loads of effort in churches where there's been no unity. And I've squandered effort, I've wasted my time a lot, and lots of other pastors who just plough stuff in, but you know, there's been no unity. So unity is the bottom line. You can have all these other issues of care and control, and unity is what we strive for. Yeah. Unity is what we look for. And the last thing I want to say is with growing pains. Culture needs to change. The care issue will come into question. People who've been controlling will feel that they are no longer involved. Church is not a comfortable place when God is moving. The other thing about going through a phase of growth is communication. It's vitally important to tell people why and where and how and everything. And a good leader like you have will always communicate the vision, will always communicate the way ahead. You see, I learned a long time ago that the passion and vision that I have isn't always translated to the people in the pew. And that doesn't make me better than them, by the way. But the passion and drive and energy that I've had for church sometimes is not on the same scale in the people. And that's not a criticism of people, and I have to understand that. So I've tried to say, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing. And it's taken them a long time to try and process it. You know, some of them, you know, they don't live in my world, in the sense, they don't read the same books as me, they don't look at the blogs that I look at, they don't listen to the podcasts I listen to, they don't, you know, they're not in conferences like I am, they're not being sharpened by other apostolic leaders like I am. I have to accept that they're not in my world. And so I'm sharing out of those rich resources. And I'm just hoping that they catch it. And they don't always catch it. That's why relational connectedness is important. Going through any season, any journey, relational connectedness. My friend Terry from New Zealand, allow this man extra grace. What a word that was. Offer this man extra grace. And it helped me, you know. But relational connectedness. When a leader loses that, simply because his drive, his ambition is just to have a big church, that's not always good. You can have the drive and vision and ambition for a big church, but don't lose the relational connectedness with people that were there in the beginning, people that have been there a long time, people that served you when there was nobody else to serve you. The communication aspect is so important. You know, whenever I share vision with a church, and I just pastor a church at the moment, I handed over the Middlesbrough church to somebody else. But any church I go to, when I cast a vision, I always use the word imagine. Imagine what this could look like. Imagine a church operating in this way. And it somehow buys people in. When you use the word imagine, it's a way of directing people's thoughts gently to think about tomorrow. Think about a preferred future, helping them share, helping them to have a compelling vision, a future, a vision that's compelling for the future. Proverbs said, where there is no vision, people perish. I read something funny the other week on the internet. It showed a church. I am finishing now, Ron. He's looking at his watch, so I am finishing. It showed a church in California, and they had put up over the front entrance, where there is no vision, people perish. Right? Proverbs 29. And they'd had a storm overnight. And the first word on the text, W, had fallen down. And somebody had got the camera. And this church, over this church, it says, here is no vision. Instead of where there is no vision, it says, here there is no vision. I'm sure they quickly put the letter back in place. I'd apply to some churches, you know. Here is no, come and join us. We've no vision. Come and join us. Come and be part of our group. We've no vision, but come and be part. God forbid, eh? So, extending grace to one another in a time of growth, in a season of growth. Affirming one another. Appreciating those who give volunteer service. It's a big thing. Maybe have a volunteer Sunday. You may already have one. Right? Some churches have a volunteer Sunday where the leadership actually appreciate the people who serve through the year, those who volunteer their time, and those who give their, give up of their time to affirm them and appreciate them. Give them £5,000 each. There we are. I told you I'd send it for you now. There we are. I've laid on a marker for you. But, so, where there's growth, there will be growth. And we learn to absorb it because God gives extra grace. God gives additional grace to see it through. But unity is the thing that we all long for. A united house Jesus said a divided house cannot stand. But a united house will make its own statement, will make its own declaration that we're in this together. However much the culture changes, however much the culture is not, that's not what when I became a member, that's not the culture of that church then, that, praise God. We've moved on. And we're moving with the change. We're moving with the flow. And we are today the church that God has called us to be. Let's stand together and pray.